And joining us right now from the Southern Ohio Sports Authority and various and other sundry media outlets in that part of the state of Ohio is our friend Jacob Wise. Good to see you tonight. But I'm glad there's no hockey game you had to go to tonight. You can visit with us here this evening and talk a little high school football. Good to see you, Jacob.
Friday night. I get Friday off to go to the opener.
All right. Well, we're glad we're not on Fridays and we're on Wednesday, and you can talk a little high school football with us. As I
Yeah,
mentioned,
absolutely.
the part of the state, the south central part of the state, there are a number of leagues in that area, headlined by a league that you and I both know so very well, the Scioto Valley Conference, the Frontier Athletic Conference, and of course the Southern Ohio Conference, which is one that has produced great football teams over the years. And I think sometimes that part of the state, Jacob, gets kind of overlooked when it comes to high school football and the amount of talent that comes out of that region of the state. There are some pretty good teams this year, and there have been some pretty good teams in the past in that part of the state, haven't there?
Yeah, I think part of it is probably somewhat due to the fact that some of those schools are a little bit smaller. They're not necessarily long-time perennial powerhouses like some of them, that get a lot of the press. But it seems like there are a few that most years are really good, make some deep playoff runs. You look at a team like Ironton that here lately has been really, really good over the last several years and won some very exciting football games. Zane Trace, you know as well as I do, playing some really good football right now. And, starting to maybe pop up some of those polls and popping into people's minds as we enter week 9 here, getting towards playoff time. But yeah, it's I would say just as good as about anywhere else in the state.
One of the things that is interesting about that region, Jacob, and especially rather for some of the bigger schools, Chillicothe, Washington Courthouse, Miami Trace, Jackson, has been the ability to find a stable home, a stable league. I mean, those schools have bounced around. Chillicothe was for the longest time in the Ohio Capital Conference. There used to be the old South Central Ohio League. There have been just a number of leagues that have kind of popped up and then dropped off, and then teams have kind of battled for a place to find a place to call home. But I think over the last couple of years, the Frontier Athletic League has kind of stabilized things, I think, for some of those larger schools in that part of the state, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's nice too because they've been able to bring along some of their longtime rivals. And that's always fun from previous leagues. But yeah, the first couple of years, it was pretty top heavy. But I think now over the last couple of years, they've stabilized a little bit. And I think because the top teams in that league in more than just football have been as good as they've been lately, they've kind of raised what the lower teams traditionally in that league have had to do. So I think, this year especially, we've seen some really good football games that maybe some people didn't expect to see. I mean, last week we had one with Chillicothe and Courthouse, and I think Washington maybe surprised a few folks that they're for real this year.
And speaking of surprising a few folks, I would have to think, Jacob, that Chillicothe falls into that category too. Scott Bartholomew in his first year. And I think when they hired him, a lot of people kind of sat back and took notice of that because of his background and the success that he's had as a high school football coach. But I think a lot of folks thought when he took over at that program, they might make a little bit of a turnaround. I don't know that anybody expected it to be this fast, as right now they're 7th in their region and they're 6-2 on the season. But I think people, when they saw Scott Bartholomew take that job, Jacob, they went, okay, this program's going to be on the come here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, as a Pickaway County guy, myself growing up, I know what that guy has been able to do in his career as a high school football coach. I think maybe, like you said, a little bit faster than what people thought, but a couple of transfers in when you have a guy that's committed to LSU playing on your team, that certainly helps. I think some of the excitement too, with the track record that Scott has over the years at a couple other places that. I think that gets the players excited too. And one of the big things for that Chillicothe program was just kind of boosting the numbers up. So, they had more players, they had more competition in practice. There was, a little bit more of some oomph behind that program, and you weren't running guys ragged, especially at a school that size. And year one, boy, I think it's exceeded a lot of people's expectations. Even some folks I thought maybe that we're grumbling a little bit about the coaching change. I think they're starting to come around now.
But the one team, though, that everybody seemingly every year in that league chases, that's the Ironmen of Jackson, and they're continuing to roll right along. When you talk about tradition, they're 6-2 right now. They've lost to some tough teams, and they played Ironton, they played Wheelersburg, they played Tri-Valley. I mean, they drop off and play some pretty good teams, and that's a program, though. I think that's kind of the one that everybody really looks at when you start thinking of the 6-team Frontier Athletic Conference. It's the Jackson Ironmen, the one that everybody is shooting for each and every season.
Yeah, I mean everybody likes to beat the Ironman. Tough place to go play.
Mm-hmm.
Very physical team always. I mean, it's always one of those games where players after they play Jackson are like, man, I feel maybe a little worse going into the next week than I did any other week throughout the season. So they beat you up a little bit. It's one of those games that you get excited for. Obviously, big one coming up here in week 10 for the Ironmen in that FAC, but. That's one that I think players really get up for. And, talking about teams raising the level of the rest of the league, I mean, that's certainly one of them you point to right off the bat.
And you talked about that Week 10 game. It's Jackson and Chillicothe in week number 10. So I think certainly a lot will be riding on that, although both teams have clinched playoff berths right now with the top 16 per region format in effect in Ohio. Let's move down a little further to the southern part of the state, Jacob. We mentioned the Southern Ohio Conference, and that's a league for the longest time that Wheelersburg has kind of been the big guy in that league in both divisions. And they've been a force year in and year out. They've played for state championship games, and not only in football, but year in and year out. That school on the Ohio River, if it's not volleyball, it's girls basketball. If it's not girls basketball, it's baseball. That's a program down there that's really churned out some talented teams in a various number of sports.
Yeah, I mean, good gracious, Wheelersburg baseball, you talk about that, and it sounds maybe crazy to say, but maybe that kind of overshadows what they've done in some other sports. Softball just won a state title. Football is always a game you look at on your calendar if you're an opponent and say, boy, we got to be ready to go for that one. And, Wheelersburg playing some good football. One of those, many teams right now in the area that, hasn't lost many games. Wheelersburg kind of in the mix with a couple other teams, 6-2 right now. But, you look at the top teams in that southeastern Ohio area, you're talking Wheelersburg, always one of the top 10, 11 teams out of the whole group. And never, ever an easy win, no matter what sport you're playing when you take on Wheelersburg.
Moving over to the Ohio Valley Conference, that's where Ironton resides right now, the Fighting Tigers. And if you've never had the chance to see a game at Tank Stadium, you've got to do yourself the favor and go watch a game at that facility. It is remarkable. Is love affair too strong a term for the feeling that people have with that football program in Ironton, Jacob?
I think that's one of those places where if you're just an Ohio football or football fan in general, that's on your top 5, 6 places in the state that you have to go watch a game. And it's not just the stadium; it's the experience of what that crowd is. I know you had Mike Hearn on last week and talking about over there in Northeast Ohio, talking about that's kind of a way of life. I tell you what, Ironton would probably have a little bit of a bone to pick with that because very, very exciting football team. Talk about a team that's scored 255 points this year and they've given up 38. I mean, unbelievable what they've been able to do here lately, and undefeated so far, 5-0 in their conference, 8-0 overall, and they're rolling right now. I don't think I'd want to be suiting up against those guys right now.
The goal there every year is if they don't get to Canton or wherever the state championship's being played, it's a failure of a season. And that's the mentality that they have down there. And that's in the Ohio Valley Conference. Portsmouth is in that league too, and that's a team that the last couple of years, they're 5-3 right now, and that's the last game of the regular season is Ironton Portsmouth at Portsmouth this season. So that's some of the strong teams in the Southern Ohio Conference. Let's go back up to the Southern Valley Conference as we start to wrap up our conversation. That's a league where, once again, we've got some pretty good football teams. Zane Trace is rolling right along undefeated. Unioto is at 7-1. Paint Valley's at 5-3. Unioto kind of handed it to Paint Valley last week, pulling away in the second half. That league this season, Jacob, I think it's fair to say it's kind of top heavy. You get past the first 3, and then the next 5 schools are all battling for playoff spots. But I don't think, I think a lot of the coaches would even agree, they may not have the talent that those top 3 teams have right now in that league.
Yeah, we saw it. You and I both saw it last week with Paint Valley and Unioto, and the week before that with Unioto and Zane Trace. I think Paint Valley and a lot of folks expected Paint Valley to be more in that game, and it was an exciting first half. Paint Valley's up 3 points at halftime, And you wonder if Uniota had a little bit of a hangover from that tough loss. Instant classic the week before at Zane Trace. It knocked their perfect record off. It took away the chances of picking up a gold ball in the SVC, which is a big deal in the SVC. People talk about that kind of stuff all the time. But Zane Trace, boy, they throw the ball well. They throw it to the running backs out of the backfield. They run the ball really well, but their defense has been absolutely outstanding. Their linebackers run well. Their defensive line basically plays in the backfield seemingly all week. But Uniota's, I mean, that's a good football team too. They could beat Zane Trace on their day. They throw the ball really well. They've got a phenomenal receiver in Maddox Fox. They've run the ball well. In fact, the guy who's not even listed as their starting running back in Griffin might be their best running back. So they come at you in a number of ways, and both teams have played some really strong defense. That those two teams are certainly in front, and of course, somebody who roots for chaos. If things go interestingly here this week, you could be looking at a 3-way tie atop the SVC. But I don't know that Zane Trace can be taken down right now.
The interesting thing about looking at Zane Trace is the impact that Heath Hinton has had on that program since taking over 3 seasons ago. And if you know anything about a high school football in the state of Ohio, the name Hinton certainly comes to mind when you think about great coaches and successful programs. Ron Hinton at Amanda Clear Creek for all those years. Tim Hinton's on Ryan Day's staff right now and has been with Urban Meyer in the past at Ohio State. That name carries a lot of weight to it, and Heath Hinton constantly talks about it. I know you've had conversations with him as well too, but he constantly talks about relying on those guys to help him each and every week. And he's been a coach of the year in the state of Ohio, Heath Hinton has. So it's not as if he's treading water in this and just figuring it all out, but to have that kind of pedigree to go back on, that's a huge advantage, isn't it?
Yeah, I think guys like that too. There is no feeling out period. It's I want to win now. We're going to figure out how to win with what's in place and however much you can change in one season, and then you just go up and up from there. And we talked about Scott Bartholomew earlier at Chillicothe. Hinton, maybe you step it up even another notch of a guy that can excite the players and get the school excited about moving up the ranks. And boy, we've really seen it this year with just a sharp, crisp team in Zane Trace. And it's a guy that runs offense that makes it very difficult for defenses to figure out what you're going to do because you have 3-4 guys on the field at a time. He does a good job of calling plays and allowing his players to make decisions on the field. You talk about good coaches like him. They find ways to let their players take ownership and feel like, it's not just doing what you're told. Obviously that's part of it, but those guys, they have some input. They know that they have to make plays and they're empowered to go do that. And I think that's a powerful thing when you're a high school football player.
Jacob Wise from the Southern Ohio Sports Authority. Always good to see you, my friend. I know I'll run into you here before the next couple of days or probably even in the next week or so. Always good to see you, Jacob.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, Jacob Wise visiting with us from the Southern Ohio Sports Authority. Does a great job.